Good evening, everybody. Thanks for Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, Dr. Gideon Polya, and Feroze Mithiborwala and Edward Wahid for joining this session. This is the third in the series of the webinar in the memory of our beloved friend, colleague, K.P Sasi. He was some of you may not have heard about him. He was a great human being. He was a filmmaker. He was a cartoonist. He's a writer. He was a great social activist. Uh, uh, he was always championing human rights, not just in India, everywhere. He did it through his films, cartoon, writings, activism. Uh, he was also great, you know, resisted imperialism, through his work. When America was bombing Iraq, there was a motion, there was a discussion about India allowing American planes to refuel from India. Then there was a tremendous opposition from India. Then he made a music video called America, America. That was tremendously successful. Yeah. And he was it was very well watched, and it was a clarion call against anti-imperialism that helped a lot. And also on Palestine, he was uh, he never thought that it was a clash between uh, you know Arabs or Jews. He considered it as a colonial implant in the middle of our the world. That is how he was described Palestine in our talks. So that's why we choose this topic as a discussion in remembrance of K.P Sasi. So I am welcoming all four of you to this webinar, and also welcome Satyasagar, who is also a associate editor of Countercurrents, so also a health activist and a senior journalist, to moderate the session. Over to Satya.
Thanks, Binu. Welcome to all the panelists and all the others who have joined this webinar today. I know the numbers are small, but I think it's an issue that we thought, Binu and me, that while there's been a lot of saturation coverage of the Palestine issue in both the mainstream and the alternative media from different perspectives, we decided to organize this webinar around 2 weeks ago. This theme topic of Israel being the last outpost of last horror show of Western colonialism, because unfortunately, a lot of discussion on Israel-Palestine makes it out to be a religious clash, or a clash of civilizations of some kind, the Judaism versus Islam. Actually, it's a very straightforward colonial, anti-colonial war or battle. So we wanted to bring focus to the colonial part of it, that people in Asia, Africa, Latin America all have common interest in supporting Palestine's fight, not because they're Muslims or whatever, because they're fighting an anti-colonial battle, and they're fighting a battle on behalf of all the colonized people of the world, or former colonies, or about to be colonized people. And this is the crux of the issue, that the white and Western colonialism has a history of genocide going back to the conquest of the Americas 500 years ago. It completely decimated the native Indians of those lands, and subsequent mass slaughter in both Asia and Africa, as also Australia, whose aboriginal population has borne the brunt of the European thirst for other people's land, resources, and subjugation. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi, when he was asked by an American reporter what he thought of Western civilization, he is believed to have said, yes, that would be a good idea. meaning that none existed. The West exists, but whether it is civilized or not is in great doubt. Western colonialists have been responsible for the greatest misery for the largest number of people in all of history, all of human history. The greed, the bloodlust, the deception, and duplicity in everything are unmatched. Genghis Khan and his hordes of Mongols may have been brutal, but even they look like saints compared to the leaders the West has produced in the last several centuries. And Israel consists of Jews who were historically the victims of European racism. We forget that they were victims of European racism. That's why they left Europe. I say European and not German, as the latter only did what much of Europe at the time wished for the continent's Jewish population. And instead of compensating the Jews with a homeland in Germany or in the heart of Europe, the colonial powers, notably Britain, transplanted them in the heart of West Asia, giving them land that belonged to somebody else altogether, to Arab Palestinians. The consequences of this creating this outpost of European colonialism in that region have been horrendous, but quite in keeping with the long history of the horror show known as Western colonialism. The speakers at today's webinar in memory of K.P Sasi are all experts on the subject of the history and current status of Western colonialism that is like a malignant cancer on our planet. I leave it to them to tell us whether this deadly ailment can be treated with chemotherapy, immunotherapy, or surgical interventions. I know for sure that Ayurveda or homeopathy is not going to work. With that, I welcome Professor Gideon Polya, who is an Australian biochemist, author, and social commentator, known for his extensive writings on global issues, including war, genocide, disease, poverty, and environmental degradation. Originally a scientist with a background in biological chemistry, he has taught at institutions in Australia. And he's recognized worldwide for his critical perspectives on Western foreign policy, particularly US and Australian military interventions in the Middle East and elsewhere. With that, over to you, Professor Gideon Polya. You have 20 minutes to tell us opinion and your perspective on the subject. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Can someone give me a full screen? Oh, you've got a full screen. I'll start anyway. Firstly, I want to address Zionist apartheid Israel as the last European settler colonial project. And I'll go right back to the Agrarian Revolution, which began in about 10,000 BCE with the transition from hunter-gathering to settled agriculture, involving cereal crops, animal husbandry, and permanent settlements. This settled agriculture meant the need to protect agricultural surpluses and settlements. It led to male militarism, patriarchy, wars, evolution of military technology, cities, city-states, nation-states, and empires. And eventually, it's led to nuclear weapons that can decimate humanity and the biosphere, and we're very conscious of that today. The Turkish conquest of Constantinople in 1453 and Muslim dominance of North Africa and the Middle East and West Asia prevented Western European expansion in those areas. As explored by Jared Diamond in Guns, Germs and Steel, in expanding elsewhere, the Europeans especially prized lands that could support European type agriculture, that is wheat and sheep and cattle and cows. And B, he makes the fundamental point about the historical technical superiority of the Europeans derived from the east-west axis of Eurasia that meant that an advance in agronomy or technology, say in China, would be rapidly transmitted along this east-west axis to Western Europe, but not so for the north-south axis, Africa and the Americas. In seizing the land and expelling or killing the indigenous inhabitants, the European invaders adopted the lie of terra nullius, which means in Latin an empty land. And this racist lie was adopted by the racist European settler colonials in the Americas, Australia, and also in Southern Africa. Terra nullius was also adopted by genocidally racist apartheid Israel, the last settler colonial project that wants all of Palestine, plus other lands between the Nile and the Euphrates, with the indigenous inhabitants to be killed, expelled, or to be confined to ghettos or concentration camps. Well, it's useful to look at the deaths from European settler colonialism, something the West doesn't want to know about. About 100 million indigenous Americans died from violence, deprivation, and especially from introduced diseases like smallpox. In the Pacific Islands, there was mass mortality due to European colonists introducing novel diseases, such as measles. In Australia, about 1 million Indigenous Australians died from violence, deprivation, and introduced diseases in the first century after British invasion in 1788. Overall, about 2 million Indigenous Australians have died from violence, dispossession, deprivation, and disease since 1788. Of about 350 to 700 Indigenous Australian languages and dialects in 1788, only about 120 survive today, and of which all but 20 are endangered. In India, the vastly outnumbered British adopted a deliberate strategy of keeping the conquered population, about 300 million in 1860, at a bare subsistence level, and controlled by British forces and a large body of British-led and well-fed Indian sepoys. It's estimated that 1,800 million Indians died avoidably from imposed deprivation over 2 centuries. Thus, to give an example, despite a very high birth rate, between the Indian population was about 300 million in 1860, and it was still 300 million in 1930. There were many man-made famines in India between the 1769-1770 Great Bengal Famine, 10 million killed, and the World War II 1942-1945 Bengal Famine, 6 to 7 million killed. Indeed, in 1935, Winston Churchill, who was an architect of the Bengal Famine, told the British Parliament, quote unquote, "In the standard of life, they have nothing to spare. The slightest fall from the present standard of life in India means slow starvation and the actual squeezing out of life, not only of millions, but of scores of millions of people." India needed to import 1 to 2 million tonnes of grain annually before World War II, but the average yearly importation of grain in 1942 to 1945 was about 0.5 million tonnes, barely enough to feed the 2.5 million strong Indian army. In China and the Congo, the populations also exceeded those of the colonial invaders. Nevertheless, an estimated 20 to 100 million Chinese died in the British Opium Wars and the connected Taiping Rebellion. In the Congo, the Belgian colonisers killed about 10 million Congolese in maximising extraction of rubber and ivory. Hands were chopped off to if there was insufficient delivery. 35 to 40 million Chinese died under the Japanese occupation in 1937-1945. Well, we could then turn to, by way of comparison, to deaths from violence and imposed deprivation in the Gaza genocide and the Palestinian genocide. The Palestinian breakout from the Gaza concentration camp and the 57-year Zionist Israeli occupation was associated with the deaths of 1,139 Israelis. However, prize-winning Western journalists have disputed the official Zionist Israeli narrative, and it seems increasingly likely that the 7th of October 2023 breakout was enabled by the Zionist Israelis to provide a 9/11 style excuse for the complete destruction and ethnic cleansing of Gaza that has now been proposed by Trump and the Zionist Israelis. Many of the Israelis killed on 7th of October were victims of high explosive firepower of the IDF, operating under the Hannibal Directive to prevent hostage taking, even if it meant killing the hostages. From data published in the leading medical journal, The Lancet, by the 25th of April 2025, it is estimated that Gaza deaths from violence, 136,000, and imposed deprivation, 544,000, on the conservative basis that indirect deaths from deprivation were 4 times the violent deaths, and these total 680,000. Exhaustive analysis of avoidable deaths from deprivation in all countries from 1950 onwards revealed that under 5 infant deaths were about 70% of such avoidable deaths in impoverished countries. You can see my book, Body Count, Global Avoidable Mortality Since 1950. Infants are highly vulnerable, as we all know. Accordingly, the 544,000 Gaza deaths from enforced deprivation included about 380,000 under 5-year-old infants. There can be a further breakdown of this horrendous death toll, which is broken down to 380,000 infants, 479,000 children, 63,000 women, and 18,000 men. However, Zionist perverted mainstream media ignore even the notion of deaths from deprivation and merely report, at the moment, maybe around about 50,500 deaths from violence, and ignore the huge number of indirect deaths. Presently, Gaza deaths from violence and deprivation total about 0.7 million, as opposed to the 50,000 you will read in the newspapers. Very interestingly, the NSA advised Trump has repeatedly indicated that 1.7 million Gazans will have to be surviving from the pre-war population of 2.4 million, will have to be moved to be able to make Gaza a nice Riviera-style luxury resort. So 2.4 minus 1.7 indicates 0.7 million missing Gazans. We know that about 0.1 million managed to escape to Egypt, and this implies that about 0.6 million Gazans have died somehow from violence and deprivation. A shocking figure. So what Trump has said actually is in accord with what the top British epidemiologists are saying, but it is what is reported is the 50,000. Well, I should make a comment about the Zionist project, 1895 to 2025. I mean, essentially, the Palestinian genocide commenced essentially in 1908 with the discovery of oil in Iran. And Britain invaded the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, in 1914, invading Iraq, and eventually with the French carved up the Middle East. I'll just turn the page. I'd make, oh, hold on, excuse me. I think one should consider also the European backing of Israel in what it's been doing for 77 years, and in particular, what it's been doing over the last 20 months. And before the bombing of Iran, the nuclear weapons possessing, hosting, or use endorsing G7, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, United Kingdom, and US responded to Israeli bombing of Iran by forcefully declaring, "We, the leaders of the G7, reiterate our commitment to peace and stability in the Middle East. In this context, we affirm that Israel has a right to defend itself. We reiterate our support for the security of Israel. Iran is the principal source of regional instability and terror. Iran can never have a nuclear weapon." Australia, which is not a member of the G7 but was invited to the recent conference, falsely agrees with the G7. But the reality is dramatically otherwise. I mean, in numerous ways. For example, the US-backed Israeli attack was unprovoked and violates international law. Israel has 90 nuclear weapons, but Iran has none. Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but Israel isn't. For 50 years, Iran and other Muslim countries and the UN General Assembly have demanded a nuclear-free Middle East. Iran has invaded no country essentially for millennia, but Israel bombed 5 countries in 2025 and has attacked 14 in 77 years. And of course, if Iran actually did have nuclear weapons, why on earth would it use nuclear weapons against Israel when half of its subjects are Palestinians? And why would it commit suicide by using its nuclear weapons against the West? The same argument was argued in vain when you remember that weapons of mass destruction was the excuse to destroy Iraq. Well, the question has been asked why former genocidal colonial powers of the G7 support genocidal apartheid Israel. And the truth is, except for Japan, they're all European. That's a simple proposition. I won't go into the details, but you know what all of these countries have been doing, either in terms of settler colonialism or support for post-World War II American aggression throughout the world. It's quite interesting that the United Kingdom has managed to invade over the last 1,000 years or it wasn't the United Kingdom, the British, let's say, or the English more properly, have managed to invade 123 countries. The United States has invaded or otherwise had a military presence in all but 3 countries of the world. Quite extraordinary. And you can then turn to what about non-G7 European countries that also fervently support apartheid Israel? All the 32 countries of NATO, all European, firmly support Israel. Many of them belong to the Zionist International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Nearly all of them do it, which fervently supports Israel with propaganda. So I'd make a final summary at this point of European complicity in the Gaza genocide and the unprovoked and war criminal devastation of Iran, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. Overwhelmingly, European countries are allied to serial war criminal and Zionist perverted America, that since Israeli acquisition of nuclear weapons in the 60s has become the dog being wagged by the Zionist Israeli tail. Secondly, all of the G7 members were involved in the US and NATO imposed Afghan Holocaust that killed 7 million Afghans through violence and deprivation. The G7 countries and many of their non-G7 associated countries have further records of involvement in war, imperialism, and genocide of Indigenous people. Third point is that all the G7 countries and many of the non-G7 European countries have a prior record of racist settler colonialism and genocide. The genocide complicit racism of the European supporters of Israel persists, as revealed by their sustained pro-apartheid Israel conduct for 77 years. And for all the political correct rhetoric we have these days, it's there, and it's borne out by how they vote at the United Nations General Assembly. So one would like to have solutions to this, and people have all kinds of solutions. But anyway, here goes. 1.7 million surviving Gazans out of a pre-war population of 2.4 million are forced to choose between starvation or risking being shot by Zionist Israelis when seeking food. I mean, this is utterly appalling. Utterly appalling. This is what I see as I eat my dinner each night and watch the television news. Gaza has been demolished. The 4,000-year-old city, it transshipped the perfumes of Arabia, Lady Macbeth, to the Roman Empire. It's a marvelous book written by William Dalrymple called The Golden Road, which is about how India had a massive effect on human civilization from Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, China, all the way through the Arab world to Spain. And in fact, he argues that the Gaza, when it was conquered by the Crusaders, essentially was a key place for the transmission of this wonderful Indian, Arabic, flowering culture of the Middle Ages to Europe. The Crusaders took back this Arabic Indian learning and mathematics to Western Europe. The world must immediately act with draconian sanctions against US-backed apartheid Israel and all its supporters, notably the US, UK, Australia, the G7 and the EU. The genocidal oppression of the Muslim world by the racist West must end immediately. The US could end it by simply abstaining at the UN Security Council. The century-long suffering of the Palestinian people would end if the world simply insisted on pain of draconian sanctions that the Palestinians are simply accorded all the human rights enjoyed in the West and elsewhere. And I'll make a final point. After the 1960 Sharpeville massacre, 69 Africans killed, the world imposed ultimately successful sanctions on apartheid South Africa. It should do likewise over genocidal apartheid Israel. 680,000, 10,000 times more Gazans killed by the 25th of April, 2025. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Gideon Polya, for your very incisive and rich description of the horror show of Western colonialism. And we will come to some questions later. I have many questions. I'm sure others in the audience also, but in the interest of time, we will move on to our next speaker, which is Professor Chandra Muzaffar, who's a Malaysian writer, activist, intellectual, known for his work in the field of ethics, interfaith dialogue, human rights, and global justice. He has spent decades advocating for a more just, pluralistic, and spiritually grounded world order. He's also the founding president of Just Peace Initiatives, an organization that promotes peace building, conflict resolution, and interreligious understanding. Over to you, Professor Chandra Muzaffar.
Thank you, moderator, friends. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you be
Peace
slightly
be with
louder?
you.
Speak a bit louder. If you
Yeah.
can.
I'd like to begin by thanking Countercurrents, my friend Binu Matthews, for this very kind invitation. This is in honor of K.P Sasi. I had never met him. I don't know this person, but from what I've read of this filmmaker, I'm most impressed by the wide range of themes which he covered in his films. I'm impressed by his very deep commitment to the struggle for justice. I hope his films and his writings can be made available to people in various parts of the world, because that's important. Many of the things he talked about, he filmed, went beyond India. They concerned humanity in the larger sense. So let this be widely publicized in honor of this wonderful human being, and let Sasi become part of the heritage of humankind as a whole, because that's the honor that he deserves. Friends, now the theme of this webinar. Israel and white colonialism. There is no need to elaborate very much on the origins of Israel. Israel's birth is deeply connected with colonialism. This is not highlighted. Before the Balfour Declaration of 1917, this idea of an exclusive Israeli state had no traction. It gained strength after the Balfour Declaration, which was basically a letter written by the Foreign Secretary of Britain, of colonial Britain, the most important colonial power of the day, Britain at that time. The Foreign Secretary, Lord Arthur Balfour, wrote to Lord Rothschild, the leader of the Jews in Europe. And in that letter, and this is now very well known, in that letter, he said that Britain would help to establish a Jewish home for the Jews in Palestine. That's the beginning of this idea of an exclusive Jewish state in this land known as Palestine. It is amazing that the British Foreign Secretary could think of such an idea, a promise that he made to the Zionists. Why? Because if you look at Palestine, there was already a land called Palestine, peopled by 3 different religious communities. You had the Jews, you had Christians, Arab Christians, and Arab Muslims as the three major groups in Palestine. In 1917, when the Balfour Declaration was enunciated, the majority of the population was Muslim, Arab Muslim, a very big portion of the population. And then you had Arab Christians, which is also a significant population at that time. And last of all, you had the Jews, who constituted only 10% of the population. Now, the point one is making is that it was a multi-religious land, a multi-religious society. It had an identity of its own, it had a long history, and it is something which had been under various governments and systems of governance and all the rest of it, but nonetheless, it had an identity of its own. That was Palestine. Now, why did Balfour suggest this idea of Israeli state, an exclusive Israeli state in Palestine? Of course, pressure from Zionists in Europe had something to do with it. They were not big in terms of numbers at that time, but they were a small part of the Jewish community in Europe as a whole. And there was this talk about having an exclusive Israeli state. Then there was pressure from Christian Zionists. Christian Zionists, separate group, not the Zionists who were Jews, these were Christian Zionists, and they were mainly in Britain and linked to rural Christianity. Now, this group also exerted some pressure and had friends among the elites in Britain. So that pressure played a role. But more than pressure, it was British colonial calculation that was responsible for the creation of Israel. The British realized that that part of the world was very, very critical. It is the only part of the world where three continents meet. West Asia. It's the only part of the world where you have nearly all the major waterways. Mediterranean, and of course, the Suez Canal was built in 1869 and so on, but the major waterways were there in that part of the world. Straits of Hormuz. This is something that the British were very much aware of. Mind you, it was, as I said a while ago, the biggest colonial power of the day. So it realized the geopolitical significance of that region. And they wanted to have a foothold. They had friends, they could perhaps depend on those friends, some of the Arab states, communities, and so on, but they wanted something which was a more solid backer of British colonial interests. And this is why they thought of helping to create an exclusive Jewish state in Palestine. So it was partly geopolitics, very important reason, but also the discovery of oil. Oil had just been discovered around that time in some parts of that region. And the British knew how important oil was to industrialization. It was vital. And they wanted to have a country that would support their interests in a region which they were not very certain about, because they knew there were nationalist movements in the Arab world, and they could not really depend upon those countries to support the interests of colonial Britain and of other colonial powers. So they pushed for this because of the economic dimension of colonialism, and also because of the geopolitics that I referred to in a while ago. So friends, that was the driving force behind the creation of Israel. It was colonial to a great extent, though that was not the only reason, as I will talk about in a while, but this played a very important role. And if you look at what had happened to the Israel that was created, and that creation became a reality for a very important reason. Of course, there's geopolitics, there's economics and all that, but the driving force behind the creation of Israel was the Holocaust. The Holocaust, Nazi Germany killing the Jews and other people, of course, but quite a lot of Jews were massacred. And that had a tremendous impact upon the psychology of Europe and the United States of America. The massacre of the Jews. A lot of sympathy. It was, of course, a terrible injustice that was done to the Jews, something that should always be condemned by every human being, the Holocaust. And in terms of what was happening at that point of time, it became the motivation for the creation of Israel. It played a very big role in pushing for the creation of Israel. Now, just reflect on this. The Holocaust in Germany and in other parts of Europe was the result of European racism. If you look at the whole history of the Holocaust, it goes back to hundreds of years, and it was this very negative attitude on the part of mainstream Europe against the Jews. Racism, blatant racism, culminated in the Holocaust, in the Nazi Holocaust. But what had happened was something that Europe was responsible for, something which was a product of European history. In the end, that Holocaust and the consequences of the Holocaust were borne by people elsewhere. Holocaust was a European problem. It was a European issue, but who paid the price? They decided to create the state of Israel. The Arabs and the Muslims were made to pay the price for the Holocaust. They transferred it to another people and another continent. And if you look at all that had happened after 1948, when Israel was created by a Western-dominated United Nations, we know this, they created Israel, supported it. And if you look at many other things that happened in those initial years and even later, like the expulsion of 750,000 people, Palestinians, from their homes as a result of the creation of the state of Israel. The Palestinians were expelled. Many were imprisoned, many were killed. This had happened during those years. And it had continued. We don't have to go into great detail here, but we know that 1967, it happened again during the Six-Day War, where again, you had a lot of people who were killed, expelled, and all the rest of it. And this has been a mark of Western colonialism. Expulsion of people, imprisoning them, killing them. This was done by the state of Israel against the Palestinian people. Of course, we know that some of those people were the victims of the Holocaust, but they had no compunctions at all about doing this to other people, even though they had suffered. But what they did was, in some ways, even worse than the suffering that they had gone through, what they had done to the Palestinian people and others. So that was, you had the Holocaust driving force in the creation of Israel, and Israel perpetuated itself through these terrible injustices associated with colonialism, expulsion, imprisonment, massacres, and so on. And that is continued. I would argue that what we are witnessing today in Gaza, starvation, is also a dimension of that history, because starvation had taken place in the empire, in the colonial empires, the Bengal starvation, for instance, and other starvation, deliberately killing people, has been very much part of colonialism also. And if you look at what has just happened, killing people, lining up for food, that is perhaps a variation of that same terrible injustice to human beings, starvation. And that has become pervasive. More than 400 people, according to recent figures, have been killed in this manner, those lining up for food. I cannot think of cruelty worse than this. Hungry, starving people massacred as part of a plan. And if there's anything worse than that, it is the fact that the world has kept quiet as a whole. Of course, groups here and there have made some noise, but if you look at the world, especially the great champions of human rights in the West, generally they're chosen to keep quiet, to allow for this terrible, terrible inhumanity to take place. So this is what has been happening. If you were talking about the horror show of colonialism, of settler colonialism, this is an example. And this had gone on. Every now and then, a few hundred people are killed. And even now, if you look at what's happening in Gaza, it has become a daily ritual, the way people are massacred. And the world watches. They're witnesses to this, and they keep quiet, by and large. They don't want to come to grips with this horrible truth, the massacre of weak people, of people who have been deprived of everything. I can think of few other people on earth who have suffered more than the Palestinians in historical terms. But we keep quiet and allow this to happen. Let me say this, friends, that while the injustice committed by Israel against the Palestinians and other Arabs and people perhaps in other parts of the world indirectly, while this is associated with colonialism and with settler colonialism, there is a difference that we have to keep in mind. And we have to explain that to a little extent. To some extent, this is to be explained before we conclude. What is the difference? Unlike all other settler colonialisms, the French in Algeria, the Brits in North America, Brits and others in Australia, New Zealand, these were the other settler colonies. We know this term. Colonialism, this is a variation of colonialism, but these are people who not only colonized, but they settled in those lands. And as a result of their settlement, the injustices were multiplied many times over. That was settler colonialism. But there was a difference as far as the colonialism associated with the Jews in Palestine is concerned. There's a difference. Because unlike all the other settler colonialisms, in the case of the Jews and the colonization of Palestine, the Jews were not just colonizers like the others. The Jews were also part of the indigenous community because the Jews were there. And the Jews have been there for a long, long while in history. We should not deny that. The Jews were part of that history, and they were there. Even when settler colonialism was taking place, the Jews were there. And that makes a difference, of course, to some extent. But if you look at the injustices, it doesn't explain any of the injustices that had taken place. But this difference is important to bear in mind. Why is it important? Because if you look at the Jews who colonized Palestine. Jews, like the Jews had stayed behind in Palestine and been there for hundreds of years, thousands of years perhaps. The important point is this, that the Jews who colonized Palestine were European Jews. And that is very, very important. They were the Ashkenazi European Jews. They were not the Sephardic Jews. They were not Ethiopian Jews, but they were the Ashkenazi European Jews. And that is an important distinction to make. That is the European Jews who came with the idea of Israel, who colonized Palestine, not the indigenous Jews. These were European Jews. And that was part of that colonial psychology, which again puts what had happened and the misdeeds of the European Jews in a separate category. Now, if you look at European Jews and their role in the Israel that was created, they played a big role in that Israel that was created, but they also ensured that they dominated that Israel. There was racial discrimination against the non-European Jews, which has continued to this day. This is another reality. So it is not just the racism associated with settler colonialism, it is the racism of the white Jews, the Ashkenazi, against the Khalids, the Khalid Jews. And there is yet another injustice that one has to expose and fight. So that brings me to the conclusion, friends. This struggle against racism in Palestine historically, what is Israel and the other areas connected with Palestine. This racism and the fight against it is a huge struggle. There is both the internal dimension within the Jewish community, the racism, and there is the racism that is broader, that impacts upon Arab Christians, Arab Muslims, and other groups. But this racism is real. And the only way to overcome that is in taking a position that all human beings are equal, that racism is totally unacceptable, that liberation means liberating everyone, including the Jews, from the type of racism which has become part of their society, and liberating everyone else from that racism. Justice, equality, these are the goals that we have to seek in order to get rid of racism, to overcome racism. That's an eternal struggle, and that struggle has to go on. And it has become even more important. It's not just Palestine, it's not just West Asia, it is the struggle of humanity as a whole. Struggle against racism, against injustices, against discrimination. And that has to continue. And Palestine, I think, has an important role to play in that struggle. And others in other parts of the world have important roles to play. And I hope that meetings like this would contribute to this struggle against racism. Because, in the case of Israel and parts of Palestine occupied by Israel, there is one dimension of racism that one has to mention. In Israel today, more than any other part of the world, there is an established, structured apartheid system. Apartheid is a reality and directed against indigenous Palestinians who are non-white, but also directed against other groups. So there is this problem of apartheid in Israel. Does the Western media talk about this? Do Western NGO activists, do they talk about this? That there is apartheid, a living ideology after South Africa, that living ideology in Palestine and Israel today. And this is something that one has to fight against too. So it is a very, very big struggle that awaits us, and we have to continue playing our role. And we should, and I think this is vital, tell our friends in Europe and in America that they have no right to talk about human rights. They have no right to talk about justice. They have no right to talk about equality and bringing human beings together unless they're prepared to address these deep flaws in their own soul as a people. And they don't want to. But we have to continue reminding them, because that's our duty towards them and towards us. That is the liberation. That is the essence of our life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chandra Muzaffar, for a very powerful presentation in which you covered a very wide range of points that we wanted to bring out through this discussion. I'm very glad that you've touched upon all of them with great clarity. And on the point about human rights, the tragedy, I think, is that in a particular context, the Western context, when they say human beings, they mean only themselves. And that has to be understood. You know, we can say all human beings are equal, and they'll say, yes, of course. But when the term human is used, it is used exclusively for themselves. Everybody else is non-human, and what we do to the non-human world, we know. So that slaughter is the only possible way. So that's why the fight for human equality is not entirely going to happen through mere persuasion or dialogue, which is important. But unfortunately, it's never going to work out like that. At least the human history bears it out that without asserting power back in some way, you know. Anyway, I will not go into that. I'll move on to our next speaker, which is Feroze Mithiborwala, who's a well-known and very prominent Indian social activist and a very vocal advocate for Palestinian rights. He's based in Mumbai and has been actively involved in civil society movements, particularly on issues around human rights, justice, and peace. Feroze ji, would request you to give us an insight into the Indian government and the Indian approach to Palestine and the current situation and the conflict between Israel.
I'll do that as well, Satyaji, but I'll have to delve into other matters as well.
Please go
Firstly,
ahead.
I'm totally honored to be here with Gideon, Polya, and Chandra Muzaffar, both people I'm truly admired. And I think the most shocking fact that has come up from Gideon Polya's study today, that more than 680,000 Palestinians have lost their lives. This is a Holocaust. This is a genocide. I had come to the figure of 400,000 because of the Lancet study that came about 8 months ago, when Lancet said that at least 186,000 people have died. Okay, so now Gideon Polya is far more, I think, on the mark, because it's about the direct deaths, the indirect deaths, the diseases, the starvation, all kinds of things. And right now we have diseases spreading in Gaza, and God alone knows what is going to happen to those people. Starvation, disease, children are vulnerable, and that is what they've targeted. And Chandra Muzaffar ji, of course, explained the entire thing very well. But I would like to talk about a few points in that context. Basically, Israel is not a product of the Holocaust. It is a product of World War I. The Balfour Declaration came through before any Hitler was around. And let us not forget that there was an EVN conference organized in 1938. Hitler comes to power in 1933. In fact, the Jews of Germany called for a global boycott of Germany. Global boycott of Germany. I don't know what they're up to. Indian Muslims are facing problems through Modi. But will we be calling a global boycott of India? So what on earth were they up to? So they got the global power to actually come down on Germany, and that is what they have to think upon on what on earth we were doing. The second part was could the Holocaust have been averted by the Americans and the Europeans? It very well could have. In 1938, America convened what was called the EVN conference, EVIN conference, where 33 countries came together. And it was a matter of just taking care of 550,000 Jews in Germany and Austria. And they could not come up with visas for the Jews. Some countries said, yes, 1,500 I'll take. Britain said something. Australia said something. Canada. Look at the vast expanse of the countries where they could have easily accommodated the 550,000 Jews of Germany and Austria, and not a single Jew would have been slaughtered in those concentration camps. Okay. Now so the point is that the Holocaust became the pretext later on for the creation of Israel in Palestine. My point was, after World War II, Germany was destroyed. The Jews were safe in Europe. They could have been given Bavaria or something or the other in Europe itself. Why on earth were they dumped onto the Palestinians? So let's not get into this Holocaust guilt trip, which the Europeans and Americans are part of. This is not our problem. So let's not give justifications where none really exists for the creation of Israel and Palestine. That's one point. The second issue is we go into the economic and the imperial dimension of this problem. But let's please go into the religious dimension of this problem. Because the colonial empires always played on the religious dimension in terms of dividing societies, partitioning societies, and to show how great European Christianity was, and so on and so forth. And so they could convert people and, yeah. So the entire question of this racism that Chandra Muzaffarji very well spoke about, where on earth does it come from? As far as the Jews are concerned, it comes from the chosen people of God concept in the book of Genesis. We are the chosen people. We are the supreme race. And now that they are in power for the last 20 months since 7th of October, they've gone mad. They keep on saying, we are the chosen people. You are subhumans. We are meant to rule you all. Where does the map of Greater Israel come from? I ask the Zionists, secular Zionists. The secular Zionists have taken the Greater Israel map from the book of Genesis, from the Nile to the Euphrates. Where does it come from? It comes from the Old Testament. It comes from the Torah. So why does the secular left, who has not really studied the old, I have for my own reasons, because I figured it out that it is all linked to politics, might as well read it. I figured it out way back in the early 1990s. By 1990, I figured it out. So the Greater Israel map comes from the Bible. The chosen people of concept God, which is a highly racist concept, comes from the Old Testament, which Jesus broke. Jesus Christ came and said, God is the God of all humanity. Blessed be the peacemakers, for ye are all the children of God. We are all equal. Those who work for peace, all of humanity are the children of God. That is the great revolution that Jesus Christ brought about, for which Jesus Christ was targeted. Jesus Christ raised the status of women in the church. Mary Magdalene was his equal partner, and she was reduced to a prostitute in the New Testament. That is what the church has done to her. So the point is, in the 1860s, yes, the British Empire was out there. The Suez Canal, the routes to India, all that we know, the old discovery, all that we know. But in the 1860s, something else happened. The crisis of Protestant Christianity. This was not a Catholic problem. It was a problem of Protestant Christianity. And as all major problems have come, it again arose from England. So it was Lord Shaftesbury and Lord Palmerston. I don't like calling these guys lords because that was the title they were given. Shaftesbury and Palmerston, all the way from Churchill to David Cameron and Blair, all these guys are Christian Zionists. All these are Christian Zionists. Okay? And for them, it was a crisis. And this is what Christian Zionism is all about. It was a crisis of the second coming of Christ. Why isn't Jesus Christ coming back? So they said there have to be fulfillment of certain prophecies. And that, the fulfillment of the ingathering of the Jews into Palestine. So until the Jews don't get into Palestine, Israel not created, the Palestinians are not expelled, the indigenous people are not ethnically cleansed, a genocide is not committed, the Al-Aqsa Masjid and the Qubbat al-Sakra are not destroyed, the third temple of Solomon is not rebuilt, after which comes the Jewish Messiah, and the Christian Zionists believe after the Jewish Messiah comes Jesus Christ, who will tell the Jews to convert to Christianity or slaughter them all. So Jesus Christ, a prophet of mercy and love, is also converted into a killer god in Christian Zionist mythology or in the theology. This is how bizarre. This is the bizarre political situation, a theological political situation, which we are standing right in front with. And Zionism and Israel is defined as a Jewish state. I'm very clear. If there are ISIS and Al Qaeda who are committing terror, I call them out as Islamic terrorists. If there are Jews committing terrorism, I'll call them a Jewish terror. Gandhiji called it out as Jewish terror. The Guardian had called out British terror when the King David Hotel was bombarded in the 1940s. If religion is weaponized, be it Islam or Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism, I will call it out for its violence. I will call it out for its terror. I've done it with my religion as a Muslim, as a reformist Muslim. I will call it out as far as Judaism is concerned as well. So the problem is, this is a Jewish state that has gone crazy. They believe the chosen people, and they are heading towards what they call the end times. This is also the Christian Zionist lobby with this madness that we witnessed in America. Netanyahu is very clear that even if the liberal Jews grow and they move away from Israel, my great power lies with the Christian Zionists who support the Republican Party. So that's where we are. Now, the other point is that as far as Hitler is concerned, I hope you all know that the Zionists and Hitler collaborated. And Hitler helped 60,000 Jews settle down in Palestine. Those who say that Hitler did a great job of killing Jews and all that are totally idiotic. Hitler did a lot of wrong with the Jews, undoubtedly. We stand with the Jewish people in Europe for what happened. But the Zionists worked with Hitler, and Hitler helped 60,000 Jews settle in Palestine. That is how the Zionists, how closely they were collaborating. Now, let me come to my part of the lecture, because I believe, and I think what we are, and I'll come to the India part to the end. Or I'll deal with the India part, now I'll go to the other part. As an Indian, I'm utterly ashamed. I come from the Gandhian, I got my inspiration from Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru and the Indian freedom movement. And the Indian freedom movement stayed with Palestine ever since Balfour Declaration. So pre-independence to post-independence, till 1990, till Rajiv Gandhi's assassination, which I believe was also part of a Mossad operation to kill Rajiv Gandhi, because he was among the last of the international non-aligned movement leaders could have taken on the West. So he was battling Israel in Sri Lanka, and finally the Lashkar, the LTT, the Tamil Tigers were used to assassinate Rajiv Gandhi. But the Mossad was training both the Sri Lankan army and the Tamil Tigers. Yes. And Yasser Arafat had written a letter to Rajiv Gandhi 2 weeks before his assassination that there is an international plot to kill you. It was not some local plot. There is an international plot to kill Rajiv Gandhi. In any case, now we are at a stage where Narendra Modi's government is totally in alliance with Israel. Subsequent governments kept on getting closer, especially post-Oslo. But now what we have is Hindutva Zionism and Jewish Zionism totally combining with each other. Okay, so you have the Hindutva right wing. We of course have Islamic Zionists as well in the Gulf, who claim to say that yes, the Jews were there and they came back and they have a right to stay there, and they try to, through their mosques, they try to, the Salafi and the Wahhabis have tried to do it. It has failed. So we also had Islamic and Muslim Zionists over here. But now what we have, because of the hatred for Muslims that has been built up in this country, especially post 2014, on a daily basis through what we call the Godi media, the antagonism and hatred for Muslims has translated into automatic support for Israel. They have no idea about Palestine. They have no idea about the question of colonialism. As an Indian, any Indian should have known that this is a classical case of settler colonialism. And the British colonized us, the European Ashkenazis have colonized the Palestinians, and that's as simple as that. But they see it only in the prism of a Muslim question, that the Muslims need to be taught a lesson, the Muslims need to be killed if necessary. And that's why they were celebrating the genocide in Gaza on the social media. But when it became a bit too much, even they withdrew. They understood that, it's not, maybe not right. The last of the BJP prime ministers was Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And there's a video going viral in the country where Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was a moderate Hindutva leader, who basically said that in terms of the two-state solution, that the Palestinians need to be given back their land. He was very clear. But as far as Modi and the current regime are concerned, they have no compunctions in the kind of support they are showing for Israel. It was really sad and shameful to see that at the United Nations on the ceasefire resolution that just went, we abstained. We did not have the guts. Even France, Germany, and Britain went along with the resolution. India abstained on that resolution. India abstained on the resolution was one part, but when the Shanghai Cooperation Organization went ahead with a resolution condemning Israel attacking Iran, we said we are not part of the discussion. So we are basically abdicating a space within BRICS, within the SCO, and I can explain the reasons why that is happening as well. Because I believe, look at India 2 years ago, when India stood with Russia, clearly, and our foreign minister said that this is a European problem, this is not our problem. So what has transpired in the last 2 years, where Modi's government has become so weak that he's not willing to take on Trump at all. I'll explain that within a minute. Basically, Modi's Adani connection, the oligarch, who's his friend, who I believe handles Modi's billions and billions. Now, one is, as you're aware, the Hindenburg report showed as to how Adani was round-tripping from his 36 offshore companies and into India to raise his stock market, and he became number 2 in the world. And the Hindenburg report exposed everything, and then Adani fell apart. But now there's a bribery case against Adani in America. The other problem is that the RAW was involved in assassination plots in Canada and in America against Nijjar and Pannu, who are Khalistani separatists, who really pose no threat to India. There's no strong Khalistan movement in Punjab. But these guys believe they are Israel. These guys believe they are Mossad. If Israel can kill, if Mossad can do, we'll go around killing and assassinating people. Now the Americans have all the evidence. One of our RAW agents is captured in America. That is why Amit Shah, our Home Minister, Ajit Dovala, National Security Advisor, Modi, our Prime Minister, and Adani, the oligarch who's kind of buying out all of India, all the 4 are now being blackmailed by Trump and Netanyahu. That is why, after 2 years of supporting Russia, today this guy's become like a little kitten sitting outside Trump's door. Okay, so that is the other big problem that we're facing. But on the other side, Sonia Gandhi, the leader of the Congress Party itself, the left parties, all of the 5 left parties, the Communist Party of India, Marxist Liberation, and so on and so forth, and even the Chief Minister of Kerala, and the Pinarayi Vijayan, and the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, they have all taken categorical positions on the Gaza genocide and on the Israeli attack on Iran. Something else is happening in India now. The political forces, the opposition parties are now beginning to speak out on foreign policy, because it's no more a matter of foreign policy alone. It is a matter of India's sovereignty. From a proud, freedom movement of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, we are being reduced to collaborators of the British and the Americans yet again. That is where we are. I'll end with and of course, Adani is, we have, Adani and Elbit are creating drones in India. Adani is supplying drones to Israel. And Adani has a stake in the Haifa port, which the Iranians are bombing. So, and there was meant to be a India-Middle East European corridor, which Netanyahu proudly announced 10 days prior to 7th of October, that here, I'm standing right here. The Gaza people can get jumping around. Nobody cares any damage for Palestine anymore. I'm about to sign the Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia. And this is the India-Middle East corridor, which will lead to the development of the region, and the Palestinians have no role to play. And that's when I come to 7th of October, which Gideon Polya rightly touched upon, and I'll delve into it, because the 7th of October is that international revolution which is leading to changes in the entire global order. The 7th of October, I refer to as the Gaza Ghetto Uprising, going back to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising to remind the Jews that today it is the Gaza Ghetto Uprising which you should be understanding, but they don't. It was also a prison outbreak. For 17 years, 2.3 million people were kept in a prison. People who don't understand that should be understanding that you are confined to a little patch of land and you just can't get out of there from the sea or the land or anywhere. You are bombed, you are starved, you are tortured, all kinds of things happen. The Palestinians decided that there has to be an uprising now. And that was 7th of October. But did Netanyahu know about it? Did Netanyahu provoke it? Yes, he provoked it. Because Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are basically Sephardic Jews, they are not Ashkenazi Jews, they're Iraqi Jews, who are fanatical, or downright fanatical, who march every 2 weeks to the Al-Aqsa Masjid saying we are going to destroy it. Okay? And they are part of this, the most right-wing, all of the Israeli governments are right-wing. This one is so far right, I don't know where the right ends. Okay. So the point is that on the 7th of October, I can give you 3 facts and in support of what Gideon Polya is saying. One is on the New York Times, a report appeared that, front pages, that Netanyahu was aware 1 year before that the 7th of October kind of attack is coming. 1 year before, there was a 40-page dossier on his table. 10 days before, the Egyptian government warned Netanyahu, an attack is coming. Netanyahu called it fake news. The third proof, that the military women guarding the Gaza perimeter, who are surveilling the entire, the entire region. I've been to Gaza. We led the first Asian corner to Gaza. You cannot get anywhere near that wall. Forget breaking it. There are surveillance, there are electronic guns, automatic guns and everything. You can't go near that wall. So Netanyahu is under crisis, we know, because of his cases. He'll go into jail. He wanted to control the Supreme Court. The people came out onto the streets. The country was divided. The government have fallen. And that is the best way Netanyahu knows, create a war on Gaza. I didn't know, nobody knew it was going to go so far. Nobody knew that it would be a war that would not kill 2,000 people. That has been the case earlier. That it will kill 680,000 people and the killing goes on. So eventually, on the 7th of October, when the outbreak took place, the Hamas guys were surprised. What on earth? Where are the Israeli army? So they went into the Berry settlement. And I'll quote Yasmin Porat, who escaped from the Hamas because the Israelis then came in later. And she said, my friends, she spoke on Israeli radio cards, my friends were killed by the Israeli tank fire, not by Hamas. The Hamas agenda was to capture hostages so they could free 10,000 of the prisoners. I've been to Gaza, I know the prisoners' families out there. They wanted to liberate the 10,000 prisoners. They had no idea. They didn't want to kill. They, of course, fought with the army, the Golani Brigade, I believe, and killed 300 of them. So out of the 1,200 who were killed that day, 300 were soldiers. The other 900 need to be accounted for. So in the Berry camps and the other settlements near Gaza, the majority of the killing was done by the Israeli army itself. Scott Ritter has said that 80% of the Jews killed that day were killed by the Israeli army. Then I come to the Noah Music Festival. How come there was a Noah Music Festival around Gaza? It was always meant to be a 2-day festival, 3-day festival. Hamas had no idea. They went out and they saw them and they went after them. Then came the Apache helicopters. There's a video of those Apache helicopters. 28 Apache helicopters come up with hellfire and shot at the Jews and the Hamas guys running from there. And Noah Feroze, who is a Air Force reservist officer, called it mass Hannibal action, directive in action. We all know what the mass Hannibal directive is. That if any Israeli citizen Israeli Jewish citizen, I would say, is going to be captured by the Palestinian resistance, kill him. Otherwise, they will exchange him for hostages. Because one Gilad Shalit led to the exchange of 1,007 Palestinians. So this was mass Hannibal directive in action. This has all appeared in the Israeli media. This is never going to appear in the Western media. But Max Blumenthal, who's American and Jewish, he was the one who broke that story on Grey Zone. Even the Haaretz attacked him, but the Haaretz had to withdraw from there. So that is where we are on the 7th of October. Not a single Israeli woman was raped. None of those 40 babies died. A United Nations sent a delegation of the Human Rights Committee, a women's delegation to Israel to meet with the victims of rape. Netanyahu did not allow any woman to meet them. Why on earth not? If the women raped, let them meet the United Nations Committee. So it was all lies from the Guardian, from the New York Times, because the first firing was done from all the Western media and our Godi media in India as well. Okay. And that is how the entire atmosphere was built up for the genocide, to justify the genocide that was coming. Okay. And now again, I'll go back to the scriptures. Are you aware that in the first book of Samuel, chapter 15 and 3, a verse that Netanyahu referred to in terms of the Amalekites, that verse says that in times of war, you can murder infants and children and women and donkeys and sheep. This is from the Old Testament. That is a lot of Christians, after reading the violence in the Old Testament, have moved away from the Old Testament. And I believe the New Testament is where Jesus is, that is where his message is. Though the Yahweh is a crazy genocidal God. I am your God, I'm jealous, I'm angry. If you worship anybody, I'll kill you, I'll murder you, I'll commit genocide. All mad stuff. Okay, and I used to sing the song Joshua for the Battle of Jericho like an idiot in school. But Joshua was an invader. The Canaanites have a history of 11,000 years. I sit on my table, this book by Shlomo Sand is always in front of me. The Invention of the Jewish People. Please read this book, part 1 and part 2. Shlomo Sand, an Israeli Jew who now left Judaism. That book is brilliant. It changes everything about our understanding of the question of Israel. There was never a mass expulsion of the Jews under the Romans. The Romans never went in for mass expulsion. The Maccabees and the others who fought against the Romans, and they are right to fight the Romans for their own freedom. But they were the ones who were expelled. Only the Maccabees and their followers. The majority of the Jews continued to stay in Palestine. And then they later converted to Christianity, they later converted to Islam, and they are the original people. They are the original Semites. This entire term of anti-Semitism is a Eurocentric Christian term which has no meaning at all. Now people are saying it. How can Palestinians be anti-Semitic? They are Semitic. How can the Lebanese and the Syrians be anti-Semitic? It's utterly bizarre. So the European Ashkenazi Jews of Chandra Muzaffar rightly referred to, they have very little or no organic relation to the land. They have no DNA of the Semitic people. And the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians of the Levant, of the Mediterranean, I don't know how Arab also these guys are because I'm ashamed to see how the Arabs are behaving. Okay. The people of the Mediterranean are different from the people of the Gulf. Very, very different. In terms of terrain, in terms of culture, the geography was bound to define that. So the point comes that the other questions which I will deal with out here, and then I'll conclude in a bit of time. The entire thing which scares us, Israel has the right to defend itself. No, Israel has no right to defend itself because no colonial occupier ever had the right to defend itself by international law. Do the Americans have a right to defend themselves in Vietnam? Ridiculous. Or the Afrikaners it's all ridiculous. Or the French in Algeria. Because there is no international law of any colonial occupier to defend itself, that is why you have Biden and Trump to Cameron to Trudeau to Macron immediately. Because this dialogue is given to them. Now please say it. No, Israel has no right to defend itself. Does Israel have a right to exist? And I admire Francis Albanese for saying it. Israel already exists. The problem is it hasn't given the map in the United Nations of what its borders are because it wants to keep on expanding. All nations exist, but tomorrow, I mean, Pakistan got partitioned into two countries. So could Pakistan say have a right to exist and you can't partition? Maybe India got partitioned as a country. Tomorrow, if France and Italy want to unite, it's fine. South Africa collapsed, but the people stayed. US has collapsed, but the people stayed. So people have a right to exist. People have a right to exist. Nations come and go. And that is a crisis today which we face. Like 680,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza. And let me tell you, sir, the world is not quiet. The world is shouting out. The world is shouting out because one friend of mine from Brian Becker, I believe, in America, he said that the battle is being fought on two fronts. One in Gaza and the West Bank, and the other in the streets of New York, London, Sweden, or wherever we are in the part of the world. And this time I have to admire the people of Europe and America because they've come out, especially the people of Europe. Ireland is one of the greatest countries of the world today. The American, the Irish, the Israelis had to shut down the embassy. Okay. So the people of the world who are marching on the streets have turned around public opinion in Europe and in America. Today in America, the majority of the people have become anti-Israel. And the people of America realize that it is the Jewish lobby. Yes, it is the Jewish lobby that is running the show. And after Trump's latest stupidity, it is becoming even more apparent. Okay? So the people did what they could, but finally a government had to enter. Thank you, Mr. Trump, and Israel actually, Netanyahu, for drawing in Iran into the war. This is the same mistake that Hitler made when he attacked the USSR. That changed the entire complexion of World War II. Now, Netanyahu, because he's so arrogant, he bombed Hezbollah in 2006 because he wanted to save the Lebanese people from Hezbollah. He bombed Gaza time and time again to save the people of Gaza from Hamas. Today he's bombing Iran because he wants to save it from the government, and the people are marching more and more in favor of the government. So this is the arrogance of the empire. I mean, I don't know if Darth Vader is Netanyahu, Darth Vader is Trump. That we need to figure out. But this is the the arrogance of the empire, that finally they make some big error which leads to the decline of the empire. So now Iran is out there, and Iran and the axis of resistance, which we knew, Iran could never have come in directly if Iran, because people are saying Iran is all about drama, not doing anything. But Iran could never have come in directly. If it came in directly first, or say to be the aggressor, they would have been taken on by all of NATO, US, everybody would have come against them. But now Iran has the upper hand, and Iran, if for 15 days, Ben Gurion airport is kept open, all these people who say this is my chosen land and Moses told me to go there, and Joshua led us in, Ben Gurion airport, within 15 days, half the population will be out. And another 15 days, I don't know how many Jews will be left in Israel. It only shows who belongs to the land. Nor do the pine trees belong to the land. It is the olive tree. That is why we saw the pine trees from Europe burning in this land. And nor do these Ashkenazi Jews are not rooted to the land. They do not love this land. The people of Gaza are being born for 20 months, starving. But they do not want to leave this land. I have not seen a single white flag in Gaza. These people are remarkable. They are just unbelievable what they are suffering, and they refuse to surrender in Gaza. That little Gaza is our Leningrad today, and that Leningrad is actually turning around the entire balance of power of the world. Everything has changed from 7th October. And look at the other side. They're actually marching in Tel Aviv. Iran, we are sorry, forgive us. Please don't bomb us. So they are taking the boats from Haifa to Cyprus. I'm wondering what's going to happen to Cyprus. Will it become a new promised land? And they are taking the route, and they're taking the route out of Egypt and marching out to the borders. Okay, so that's where we are. The ones who claim to be the God-given promised land could not take the bombing for a week. And those who are saying it is my land, we have been here for 11,000 years, are refusing to leave the land. It's just remarkable what's happening today. So that axis of resistance from Palestine to Lebanon, Hezbollah, who have faced a lot. I was there for Hassan Nasrallah's funeral. I've seen the residential bombings, amount of suffering that the southern Lebanese have faced. And then Syria, unfortunately, has fallen, but I believe Syria will, I think, rise during this period again. And because the Syrians, the Jolani, ISIS, Al-Qaeda army, Trump's friends, have actually blocked the Iraqi-Syria border, because Israel is worried that the Iraqis will march in through the border and go all into Golan, and it's going to happen. That's also going to happen. Of course, the Iraqi militias will soon take on the American bases, because there's a parliamentary resolution that all the American bases should be shut down. What on earth are they doing there? ISIS, Al-Qaeda don't exist. They are actually ruling Syria now, so maybe they should go there. And of course, in Syria also these days will be attacked. Ansarullah are remarkable. They are also starving as a nation. Saudis collected 34 Islamic countries. Islamic NATO was formed by Saudi to go bomb Yemen. They were all defeated in 2022. Trump went again for a month and figured out he can't defeat the Ansarullah. And that is why I say, and I said this in Iran also, there is no Islamic Ummah. The Islamic Ummah is a figment of the Muslim imagination. There is the Ummah of the resistance. There is the global community of the resistance. Those who stand with the resistance, those who stand with Palestine, those who stand with Iran and the axis of resistance are my Ummah, are my community. And they can be of any religion or of no religion. Okay? So that is where we are today, where the BRICS formation, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Ibrahim Traore, and the wonderful work that been done in Africa, he's become a symbol of African liberation, of President Maduro and Bolivia. And all that is happening around. Maduro marched with 100,000 people in Caracas to support Iran. Okay, so something wonderful is happening in the world. And one of my Maulana friends, he's a Shia Maulana, I'm very close to him. He actually said this attack on Iran was a blessing in disguise. We were waiting for something to happen, because our hearts were aching every day. From the 18th of March, there's no food going in, no water going in, no medicine going in. And they're being bombed on the daily basis. Something had to give. So I think Yahweh put it into this guy's heart, Netanyahu's heart, go, thou shalt go bomb Iran. So he went and bombed Iran, and he's done his job. Okay. So because Yahweh does all funny, idiotic things. Okay. Yeah. So now we are at a position, friends, that Hamas really had to do what it had to do, because if they didn't do it, it was a lost cause. So Yahya Sinwar is the architect of the entire global transformation that we're witnessing. And why did Hamas have to do it? It's called the Al-Aqsa Intifada, because they were constantly targeting the Al-Aqsa, that is going to go and it's going to go. The second thing, of course, the siege of Gaza had to end. We cannot carry on this way. The 10,000 prisoners now, who are 20 to 25,000 prisoners. And the reality, it is not about 20,000 prisoners. All the 7 million Palestinians in historic Palestine are all hostages. All the 7 million. They have been so since 1948, or maybe earlier. And then, of course, the Abraham Accords. If the Saudis and Israel had tied up on the Abraham Accord, they signed it, it would have become very difficult for the Palestinians to then talk to the Muslim world, because the collaborators with Saudi would have increased. So these were the reasons that Hamas did. Netanyahu knew, he laid the trap, and now Netanyahu is entrapped in his own trap. That is where he essentially. So I believe that the liberation of, and I'll just like to say the last part, that if you are aware, there is a belief in Israel that the two divided kingdoms never went beyond 80 years. This has been discussed in the Israeli media, commented upon by Ehud Barak and Naftali Bennett, both former prime ministers, that we have never gone beyond 80 years, the two Israeli kingdoms. Will we go beyond 80 years? And by 2028, I said this 3 years ago, I don't believe, this was way before 7th October, that I do not believe that Israel is going to exist beyond 2028. And because of their own actions. No other liberation movement has made the compromise that the Palestinians have. They gave away 78% of the land. They said, okay, we'll settle for 20%. Arafat took responsibility for the security of the Israelis. That was ridiculous, but he did it. And then he realized it was a folly. It was like Mahatma Gandhi told by the British, take responsibility of the British of our security till we leave. It was bizarre. So finally, either Israel settles for, and that requires a regime change. There's going to be no regime change in Iran. But a regime change in Israel is possible, because if the Likudniks are thrown out, and some, I don't call none of them moderates, but at least if they understand that if Israel is to exist, they have to coexist besides the Palestinians, and do they settle for a two-state solution on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. That is the only way. Otherwise, the South African apartheid state fell and is gone. Nazi Germany was never accepted by us. So why are we accepting a Judeo-Nazi apartheid state? And the term Judeo-Nazi came through Yeshashav Leibowitz, a great Jewish Israeli philosopher, a man of conscience. He said this way back, that we are now the Judeo-Nazis. And these are, I don't know how many hospitals Hitler bombed. I don't think he bombed hospitals. But Netanyahu, the Hitler of our times, and worse than him, has bombed hospital after all. He's actually complaining of some hospital bank over there. 600 Iranian civilians have died compared to 15 or 20 Israeli civilians. That is how careful Hamas to Hezbollah to the Ansarullah, Houthis, and everybody has been, the Iraqis and everybody. That's how careful they've been about taking care of Israeli civilian life. Though on the other side, they have no compunction about killing hundreds and thousands of the people of the region. So I think it is now the Palestinian Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews of the region, that they are now coming together, and they are the people of Christ. These are the people of Christ. Palestinian, Jesus Christ was Palestinian. And I keep on saying that Jesus Christ is being crucified again. He's being crucified by the same people again. But just as Jesus Christ was resurrected, these people will be resurrected. And in the resurrection of Palestine, will we see the salvation of the world. Because when Palestine is free, the world will be free. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive 360-degree kind of view and very novel points. And I think
Actually, for some reason, Chandra Muzaffar really enjoyed what I said.
We all enjoyed
Chandra Muzaffar really enjoyed what I said. Yeah.
We all enjoyed
And
this.
so did Gideon Polya. Thank you. I'm really honored to be with both of you earlier. Seriously.
Yeah. So many ideas, many new novel points, and very important points, and I think connecting it up with the scriptures and history, religious edicts, the whole Christian Zionist thing is very important. Those, while it is not strictly a religious battle as such, it's a
That's true.
colonial
That's true.
battle.
Agree.
But I think that these points are there. I mean, they're very real
Yes.
also. That's the point. And I think I'm very thankful to you for your sharing your very vast kind of source of knowledge with us today. We are running a bit out of time. Binu, what do you think? Do we have time for one question, or shall we go ahead with? Are you there? Binu is going to sleep. Let me go ahead with.
Yeah, if there is someone to make a question, please give them a floor for 5 minutes or so. Then we can go to the presentation about.
Well, I have a question to ask
Okay.
the speakers, all of them. Given the fact that in this whole story of Israel-Palestine, the US figures very prominently, as it did last night when they went and bombed Iran. The Europeans come across as being the peacemakers, or at least pretend to be the peacemakers, whereas from what all of you have said, the problem starts in Europe. It's European racism that results in the Holocaust, and then that is used to push through the idea of Israel. What about a two-state solution, which is acceptable, I think, to a large number of people supporting the Palestinian cause also, but two states formed and given simultaneously membership of the European Union? Because it disturbs me endlessly that the Europeans don't seem to be paying anything for this whole story at all. Would that be, I mean, I know it sounds very far-fetched, but the Europeans have just gotten away scot-free for what they did to the Jews. They paid no price at all. Either they should be given a homeland in Europe, as Feroze said, in Bavaria, why not? But I'm saying that Europe doesn't, the Americans are coming across as villains, and they are villains for all kinds of reasons. But the Europeans are getting away scot-free. I think European Union has to admit both the newly formed state of Palestine and the remaining state of Israel immediately as members, because that is what will ensure that this internecine fight, which is happening for many, many decades, will not continue in future. Is that a real? It's not about possibilities. Is that a good idea? Or
I just try to comment for 1 minute. One is the Europeans are not peacemakers. Germany, after America, is the biggest supplier of weapons to Israel. Then comes Britain, and then comes France. So the Europeans are complicit in the genocide. They give political protection and they give weapons. And Germany is number 2. They are now complicit in a new Holocaust. So that's where we are. As far as you said, okay, let them give them whatever in Bavaria. That's for the Ashkenazi Jews. In fact, the Ashkenazi Jews seem to have plans in Ukraine now, because the Ukraine war was also a lot to do with their second Israel. Okay, but the Palestinians will not become part of the European Union. They are part of Asia, so they will remain our people as Asians. And I don't think the Palestinians have any interest in becoming part of the Eurozone music festival or anything of that sort. But yes, as you said rightly, the Europeans have not paid a price for what they've done. The Middle East has paid a price. The Global South has paid a price. America has been taken over by this crazy Jewish lobby, and they are paying a price. The American people are paying a price. That is why I said, when Palestine is free, the Palestinians know they're occupied. The Americans are just about figure they've been occupied. And the Americans are now fighting their own battle for their own liberation from this globalist Jewish lobby. That's all I'll end with here.
Thank you. Any comment or response, Professor Gideon, Polya, or Professor Chandra, Muzaffar? Just a last comment.
Yeah, a very quick comment, if I may, Yeah, I don't think the Palestinians would have any interest in becoming part of Europe. And as Feroze had said just now, European states are also complicit, and I don't think they should have a role in the reconstruction of the Palestinian state. I would argue that perhaps the idea which should be propagated, canvassed at this point in time, though we may need a bit of leeway before this idea is propagated, is the idea of a single, unified, democratic, constitutional state.
Very true. Very true.
Not two states.
Exactly.
Because the two-state idea could be the basis of continuous conflict after what has happened for so many decades. But the idea of a single, democratic, unified state, where all the communities live together.
Muzaffarji, your face is off the screen. Your face is off the screen. Please come to the center. Yeah, please come. Thank you. Yeah.
Now, I was thinking that this is perhaps something that has been proposed by quite a few people, and it's worth looking at, the idea of a single democratic state, and perhaps a state which would be different from the Westphalia model. The notion of a state that is linked to a particular ethnicity and so on. We have to get away from that. This could be more like a confederation of different communities, a bit like what the Ottoman Empire was in terms of its different communities, with a great deal of autonomy for individual communities. Cultural autonomy, religious autonomy, but nonetheless a political entity which would function as a political entity at certain levels. It's something worth pursuing. Because if you look at Palestine as a whole, it is actually a very small area geographically. And to talk about dividing it, I don't know whether it would make any sense, but more important, after all that has happened, I have a feeling that, two states, given the existing situation and the backdrop of what has happened, a two-state solution may in fact fuel further conflicts. Because one state would be dominated by the Jews, I suppose the other state would be dominated by the Arabs. So I don't know whether that is the solution. So maybe one should try to pursue this idea of a single, democratic, decentralized, unified state in Palestine, as it is.
Right.
Just
Thank you, Professor Gideon Polya.
So you're mute. You need to unmute yourself.
You're muted, sorry.
Unmute.
Satya ji, unko unmute kar lo. Can you unmute? He's fine now. Yeah, so speak.
Okay. I seem to have disappeared, but anyway.
No,
I totally agree what Chandra is saying. I've always believed in a secular, democratic solution for Palestine. All men equal, one person, one vote, zero tolerance for racism, the ability of anyone could go anywhere in Palestine if they want to. It's the ultimate solution. While there is no longer economic justice for Palestine, for Africans in South Africa, they at least have equal human rights. They mightn't have economic justice there, but at least they have equal human rights, which is an enormous advantage. I think I agree that a two-state solution is impossible, because you'd have a Zionist-dominated state occupying 80% of the land and treating its indigenous subjects abominably. And the two-state solution, in fact, has been a fig leaf to cover the cowardice of Western countries.
Right. Wow,
Thank
this
you.
was great.
Thank you very much.
Satyaji, we need to thank you for this great anchoring you've done. It's really been nice. Really, thank you.
Thank you. And since we are quite behind time now, I
Right.
would like to invite Advocate Abdul Hamid, who's the, Abdul Wahid, who is the president of the Student Islamic Organization in Kerala, to tell us about the campaign that they're doing in Kerala on boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israel. Advocate.
Satyaji, just a second. Satyaji, I have to leave. I have a live program on at 7 p.m. So I have to leave.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, sir. Gideon Polya, Pusoji, truly honored to be with you. Thank you. Thank you, Satyaji. Yeah. Binu, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Feroze. Thank you, Feroze.
Keep in touch.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay.
Is your video
One
on?
of guests and participants, as the president of SAO Kerala, I am privileged to address this webinar in the streamed lecture series commemorating K.P Sasi, a fearless filmmaker, storyteller, and human rights activist. Also, a good friend of SAO, whose legacy inspired us to stand boldly against injustice. I think the theme discussing here is not merely an academic exercise, but a critical lens through which we confront one of the most pressing moral and political issue of our time. I appreciate the efforts of the organizations of the webinar for selecting this theme for this webinar, which is commemorating K.P Sasi. There are a lot of Palestinian solidarity movements happening in India in many forms. I hereby try to present the BDS movement and its activities in India in short words. The BDS movement launched in 2005 by Palestinian civil society organizations. It is a non-violent campaign inspired by the South African anti-apartheid struggle. Its goal is to pressure Israel to comply with international law through three key demands: ending the occupation and colonization of Palestinian lands, ensuring equal rights for Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel, and upholding the rights of Palestinian refugees to return as per UN resolution. BDS is grounded in the principle that Palestinians deserve the same human rights as everyone else. A call for justice there resonates globally, including here in India. In India, the BDS movement has gained traction among activists, students, and grassroots organizations, particularly in response to the escalating violence in Gaza after October 7. The movement here focuses on raising awareness about Israel's actions, which many, including UN experts, have described as genocidal. By boycotting companies complicit in Israel's occupation, divesting from institutions that profit from it, and advocating for sanctions, Indian activists are taking a moral stand against complicity in these atrocities. One significant activity in India is the push to boycott companies like Tata, accused of ties to Israel's economy. Groups like Indian Peoples in Solidarity with Palestine conducting several campaigns under the banner BDS India. In Kerala, Students Islamic Organization, which is I am a part, have marched against brands such as Tata's Zudio, urging consumers to choose ethical alternatives. Similarly, many students and faculties from Indian and international universities recently called for the cancellation of an India-Israel Business Summit at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, citing Israel's actions in Gaza. These efforts highlights a growing consciousness among Indians to reject complicity in oppressions. The Indian campaign for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel has also been pivotal, transforming spaces like universities campus into HP-free zones by boycotting HP products due to their role in Israel's biometric system that restricts Palestinian movement. Additionally, the All India Kisan Sabha and many other movements joined with BDS, opposing Israel companies' influence in Indian agriculture and other many areas. These actions reflect our historical commitment to anti-colonial struggles and solidarity with Palestine. However, the boycott movement, largely the Palestinian solidarity movement in India, faces fierce opposition from the Sangh Parivar, Hindu nationalist coalition, which has launched a hate campaign against the activists. Even in the last month, after our Zudio march, there is a lot of hate campaigning against us for supporting Palestinian and calling for boycott of Tata. They falsely label Palestinian supporters as anti-national or anti-Hindu, particularly targeting them. These smear campaigns misrepresent BDS as an attack on Indian businesses, ignoring its focus on ethical accountability for complicity in Israel's action. Such tactics aim to suppress solidarity with Palestinian and South divisions, but they cannot erase the moral imperative driving solidarity movement for Palestine. Our moral and ethical duty clear. I think our moral and ethical duty is clear. We cannot remain silent spectators to the suffering in Gaza. By supporting BDS, we align with justice. By supporting the Palestinian solidarity movement, refusing to fund or normalize a regime that violates human rights. Every boycott, every divestment, every call for sanction is a step towards accountability and a free Palestine. I think this movement is getting more and more, popularization is happening nowadays. And at the same time, the Sangh Parivar is also making a big scale hate campaigns against these movements. I think there is some cases are registered against the BDS in India movement against their activists, and some other cases are going on, and hate campaigns are going on in the Godi media and in social media platforms. But moreover, the Palestinian solidarity movements also getting strengthened thing. This is all I have to submit here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for inviting me for this session. Thank you to the organizations of this webinar, Countercurrents. Thank you, Binusar and others.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for telling us about your actions on the ground, which are equally important. I would like to thank Professor Gideon Polya and Professor Chandra Muzaffar and for their sharing their valuable insights with us. I hand it over to Binu for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Satya. This is a formal thank you note. No, we are all co-travelers. In spite of that, thank you, Dr. Gideon Polya and Dr. Chandra Muzaffar and Feroze Mithiborwala for attending this webinar and giving very insightful presentation on the Palestinian. And also I would like to thank Abdul Wahid, President of SIO Kerala, for giving a brief of the BDS movement. It's in a nascent stage, so that's why we thought we would give this platform to this the nascent BDS movement in India, so that they can it can grow and become a much more bigger movement in Kerala and India. And I also, this Zoom platform is not actually ours. One of our friends, friend of Shashi also, Vidya Dinkar, she, lets us to use this platform for free. So I would like to formally thank Vidya Dinkar for allowing this Zoom platform for every month for hosting these webinars.